58%. That was the share of tokens U.S. firms processed through Chinese models on OpenRouter, according to reported data. The surprising part is not that developers found a bargain, it is that Washington is considering rules for software that can already be copied. This is the fight over open model weights. A closed model is like renting a restaurant kitchen. Open weights are the recipe, equipment list, and keys handed to everyone. You can regulate the supplier. You cannot make every copied kitchen vanish. That difference now matters for companies that use AI to write code, serve customers, or cut cloud bills. Later, we will answer the only market question that matters: does blocking U.S. use remove the advantage, or simply move it overseas? The next surprise is buried in the rulebook itself. The original export controls were built around a completely different kind of model than the one causing this headache today. The 2025 export rule created ECCN 4E091 for frontier model weights. It requires licenses for unpublished weights trained above 10 to the 26 operations threshold. The key word is unpublished. The rule was aimed at a small set of advanced closed models, not every downloadable file. That boundary made strategic sense at the time. A government can restrict a scarce asset moving between known organizations. Open weights turn the asset into software inventory. Once the file is broadly available, policy stops looking like a gate and starts looking like a warning label. Then, Kimi K3 sharpened the problem. Reporting describes Moonshot AI, a Beijing-based company, as releasing a model that performs alongside leading U.S. models. The same reporting says developers test Chinese releases because they are inexpensive, capable, and easier to control than a closed American interface. So what can Washington actually do about a file that already exists on servers everywhere? The menu turns out to be less like a delete key and more like a toll booth. Reported options include entity list additions, official safety warnings, an executive order limiting company use, and requirements that firms accept responsibility for data protection. Each tool raises the cost of touching a model. None reaches into a laptop and removes a file already there. The DeepSeek episode shows why this is not a simple switch. One report said it was headed for the entity list, then said the White House paused rather than heightened tensions with China. That is a policy trade-off in miniature. Pressure has diplomatic and business spillovers. Imagine trying to ban a spreadsheet after it has been emailed around the world. You can make using it awkward, risky, or expensive. You cannot recall every attachment. Open weights create that same containment problem, only with a much more valuable file. The harder part underneath all of this is that the administration itself has not settled on one single theory of what the actual problem even is. The personnel calendar makes the argument visible. TechCrunch reported that Sriram Krishnan would leave his White House role at the end of June. Days later, the Foundation for American Innovation said Dean Ball would join OpenAI on July 6, while staying a non-resident fellow. David Sachs publicly rejected the idea of using regulatory uncertainty as a competitive weapon. His point is sharper than a personnel dispute. If fear becomes the policy, companies cannot tell whether compliance means safety, politics, or simply waiting for the next headline. Meanwhile, ExecutiveGov reported that CAISI Director Chris Fall left after 3 months, with NIST Director Arvind Raman named interim replacement. When the office built to set AI standards is changing leaders, uncertainty is not merely a talking point. It is part of the operating environment. Now, for the one number that turns a dry Washington policy argument into a very real market argument for anyone building on this technology. Benzinga reported Chinese models reached 58% of tokens processed by U.S. firms on OpenRouter. It also reported that share had nearly tripled since January, while U.S. model share fell. Treat that as a revealed preference, not a referendum. Developers are choosing what works for their jobs. For a U.S. company, model choice is not an ideology quiz. It is a capability per dollar decision. A closed American service can offer support and controls. An open model can offer flexibility and a lower bill. A ban would change that menu by law, not by changing the code. Here is the containment trap. If US firms lose access while other markets continue using the same downloadable weights, the code still spreads. The restriction may protect some domestic users from risk. It may also leave them paying more while overseas competitors keep learning on the cheaper tool. For NVIDIA investors, this is a demand map question, not a patriotic scorecard. The company sells the picks and shovels behind model training and use. Fragmenting model access could redirect where experimentation happens, which is different from eliminating the compute behind it. So who keeps the leverage? The side that combines low-cost, capable software and permission to use it. A US ban could make Chinese open models legally radioactive at home. It cannot uninvent the weights. That makes containment a competitiveness choice with a security price, not a clean-off switch. Watch the channel's documentary on MU next. The reusable lesson is simple. When technology becomes cheap to copy, the real fight shifts from owning it to deciding who is allowed to build with it.